Hello and welcome to the Evolving Christian Faith Network videocast. My name is Bo McGuffey. I am your host. I also go by the name of Irreverence on the web. If you are interested in finding out more about a revisionist theology or spirituality, then I invite you to check out my website at www.evolvingchristianfaith.net. This particular video wrestles with the question, what the hell do we do with hell? And initially I wanted it to be a singular video, but I realized that it just sort of grew as a discussion, because in order to present my understanding of what we should be doing with hell, I had to jump through certain hoops and present other understandings as well in order for people to get a sense of why I am where I am. And so as a result of this, one video grew into more than one. So this is the first installment of a series. But anyway, what the hell do we do with hell? Now, that's a big question, of course, today in some circles. But from a certain Christian theological perspective, I have to admit the answer for people like myself is, that the question is moot. Generally speaking, it's not uncommon for progressive Christians to come across certain kinds of theological questions and just say, whatever, because the question has become somewhere along the line a non-question for the particular person. Some examples of that might be, should we read the Bible literally? Well, if you want to convince a progressive Christian that they should read the Bible literally, they might listen to you, but they're not really listening to you, because you're not going to convince them that they should read the Bible literally. Another example might be, should we as Christians have slaves? Well, that's kind of a settled question as well. Yeah, not really interested in even opening up a conversation about that for the most part. What about, should women be ordained? Should gays and lesbians be ordained? Also, both of those tend to be closed questions. So yeah, we've already been through that. We've already wrestled with those. While at one point they may have been questions on our plate, and we're like, oh, what do we do with this? They're not really our questions anymore. And so effectively what has happened is those questions have been settled, put away, and we moved on. This kind of approach to certain questions might be considered closed-minded. I don't think it is the case. I think it is a result of critical thinking. There is a difference between being closed-minded and not listening, and being someone who has listened, who has evaluated, who has critically thought about it and said no and moved on. An example of this might be to say, just go back to the human experience, my own experience with Santa Claus. I used to believe that there was a roly-poly man in a red suit who used to live in the North Pole, and he would deliver gifts to children on Christmas. I was told this by my parents. The gift is from Santa Claus. It came a point in my life, however, I started to see things differently. And as I look at the world around me differently, I'm like, I see this, and I see this, and I see this, and it doesn't really go along with this whole idea of Santa Claus exists. And so what happens is, as I'm growing in my critical thinking skills as a child, and as I start to apply those critical thinking skills to what I had been told previously about Santa Claus, I eventually got to this point where I said, I don't believe that Santa Claus exists anymore. Once someone has applied that kind of critical thinking and resolved an issue like that, there really isn't any going back. There isn't any going back to me saying, you know what, I changed my mind. I do believe that Santa Claus exists. It doesn't work like that, because the question has been critically closed. And then it is, as I'd mentioned before, time to move on to different kinds of questions. It might open up new questions. By closing one question, you can open up other questions. But that isn't the same thing as reopening the old question. It's that question is put to bed. Now, in the same basic way, progressive Christians look at certain questions, and they have said, we've applied our thinking skills to, and no, that's not where we're at anymore. We aren't even interested in discussing that question, because, we are moving on in our spirituality and our theology. just because progressive Christians, and I guess when I say progressive, I generally tend to think in terms of revisionist. Progressive is a term that many people use in different circles. It's relative to a certain extent. But when I say progressive Christians, I'm really thinking revisionist theologies here and so on. But there are Christians out there for whom that question of what the hell do we do with hell is a very vital question, and they're struggling with it. And I think the reason why it's become a big issue, especially now more so than ever, at least from what I can tell, is thanks to Rob Bell. He's a very popular guy, and he is publishing and talking at a time when information is easily and efficiently disseminated online. And so the big to do relatively recently, a couple years back or whatever, was his book Love Wins. I admit I have not read Love Wins. As a book, it is asking questions that, like I said, I've kind of moved through already. I've put those behind me. And so I really don't have an interest in reading the book, but I have looked at some of the reactions. And I know that it is cutting edge questions for certain moderates and left-leaning evangelicals. So I recognize that it's a very important book and that it speaks to many people and their questions. But while I have not actually read the book myself, I do have a second-hand impression. I've read stuff here and there online, of course, and my impression from what I've read is that Bell has adopted what's called a universalist theology. Now, a universalist theology is a theology that is meant to answer a question. Okay. Now, this theology is universalist theology. It isn't new. It appeared in an official sense in certain circles in Christian theology in the 1820s, not 1920s, 1820s, mind you, so it's like 200 years old in a more official capacity in some circles. But it was a theology that is meant to address a question, a fundamental problem. Because regardless of what age Christians have lived in, all we have to do is look around us and say, oh my goodness, look at the injustice. Look at the disasters that are all around us. How do we make sense of this proclamation that God is love with, oh my goodness, look what's going on around us? How do we as Christians reconcile this image of God as love with this very human need that we have to feel that the universe around us is ultimately just and it's therefore safe to live in? Well, enter the theologians. This is where they shine. They take the big questions and they wrestle with them and they come up with their answers. And there are sort of three basic ways that I'm going to identify that theologians have come up with to address these questions. And I'm going to say there's a conservative, there's a moderate, and then there's a revisionist approach. And this particular video focuses on the conservative approach. And a couple of conservative theologies I'm going to address here. One conservative approach, is to say that that there is indeed a hell, because we're dealing with injustices and things like that. There is indeed a hell, and that hell is like a jail. So what the hell do you do with hell? You say, yes, it's real, and it's there for those who need to be there because they have crossed a line, that inexcusably crossed line. That they should have never done, and it's a bad, bad thing that they've done it, and therefore they are going to suffer in hell for all eternity. So hell is real. It's there for the people who have crossed the line, transgressed that line. What is this line? Well, it depends on the tradition. For some, it might be an excusably bad thing. That you just can't forgive. For some, it might be they didn't say the magic words in their heart and with their mouth that Jesus is my Lord and Savior. So there's a couple of different ways that they might understand what that line is that has been crossed that lands people into eternal torment. It depends on the tradition that the theologian is speaking out of. But that's their answer, basically. What do you do with hell? Well, whether we like it or not, hell is real, and it is for a certain class of people. That's not us, it's them. But it's for a certain class of people, and it is for all eternity after you die. Well, kind of a problem with this, and that I would say is that any image of God who would confine any living creature to an eternal torment in hell. That is, you just can't rationalize or reconcile that with God is love. It just doesn't work. So there's an incompatible something going on there. You just can't say that. And theologians have recognized this in more conservative circles. And they're like, yeah, we have a problem. So what we're going to do is they shift their theology a little bit. And this is what I'm going to call the wanting it both ways theology. There are different ways it plays out. But I'm going to call this the wanting it both ways theology. Still a conservative theology. Because what they do is they take that fiery image, the fiery image of fire and brimstone and all that other stuff that's typically associated with torment in hell. They take that image and they tweak it. Because they take that image that is fires of punishment and turn them into fires of purification. Again, they use biblical images, but they're focusing on different things. And the purpose of the fiery image is to burn off all of the impurities so that the ultimate purpose is fulfilled. Like, for example, take a pot or a vase or whatever. You're making a vase and you've got all this clay and smash it all together, spin it around. You've got this wonderful vase that it's all clay-like, and you throw it in the kiln. And the kiln then, poof, the fire burns away all of the impurities, hardens it and everything. And as a result of the flames, ta-da! You have this wonderful, beautiful vase that could not have happened without that refinement process. So theologically then, this image of fire shifts from one of punishment to one of purification. One theology that's out there I've heard of is the idea, I'm going to call it a second chance theology, but once you die, say you rejected Jesus as Lord and Savior in your life, and once you die, however, because God is merciful and God is love, God doesn't cut off the opportunity to turn to God. So after you die, in the afterlife, you can turn around and say yes to God. God says yes to us. We turn our backs on God. We say no. But then when we decide to turn around and say yes, then we are liberated and we then are purified. So the experience of the afterlife helps us to then turn to God. It's a second chance theology. So then hell, if you will, becomes a temporary experience. But it is for the purposes of helping us to turn so that we can be reconciled to God. So these two approaches, the idea that hell, yes, eternal, yes. Number one. Number two, hell, yes, eternal, not necessarily. They might say, no, ultimately no. Or they might say, yeah, it's up to the person, or they might say, but the thing is that there is the possibility of not eternal. It's temporary and it's meant to serve the greater purpose of reconciliation with God. So two conservative approaches, I consider them both conservative because what they do is they both take very seriously the I'm going to say pain, okay, whether it's punishment or purification, pain in the afterlife as a significant part of Christian theology. So they want to keep hell and the reality of hell in the afterlife. And that's what I want to focus on with regards to saying a conservative theology. But anyway, that's the first part here. We are then now we're going to move on to a more moderate approach to hell. Not in this video, however. You're going to have to shift over to the next video. And hopefully you will find this interesting enough to actually make that jump. And I do encourage you to do so. But anyway, as I get ready to wrap up here, I want to mention that the comments on the video for YouTube are turned off. So if you want to comment on my video, I'd like to hear back from you. If you want to comment, you have to either do it on the blog, Evolving Christian Faith Network, or excuse me, evolvingchristianfaith.net, or the Evolving Christian Faith Network Google Plus page. So those are your two options. I don't like the way Google has integrated everything. That's why I'm turning off the YouTube comments. But anyway, please remember that if you're interested in finding out more about a revisionist theology or spirituality, go to my website. You will find my book there, a listing for my book, which is Drinking from an excuse me, wow, I'm losing all vocabulary now. Drinking from an Empty Glass, Living Out of a Meaningless Spirituality. But anyway, I look forward to seeing you in the next video, and until then, peace.